Hi, everybody. Welcome, welcome. I hope you're having a good day. Going to do a little bit of Latin here, indirect statement, and I think another irregular verb, and then we'll see how we're feeling. I'm having a little focusing trouble, so it might not be super long, but we'll get at least through 2. Oh, and thanks for the resub. That's almost 2 years. That's a long time. Hopefully you've learned something and not regretted it. Or maybe you learned something and have regretted it. I don't know. But thank you all the same from me. I do appreciate it. I know I don't stream as regularly as I used to. Again, I just don't like my current setup. It's hard for me to stream. So still working on that in the long term. But I appreciate it. And the parkour emote for reasons. All right, so last time we learned gerunds and gerundives. Gerundives are like adjectives. They get used in purpose clauses a lot. We also talked about the irregular verb ao. Not that exciting, but it's an irregular verb. I have learned many things that I don't need to own my own Learn About. That's right. Why choose when you can have all the things, I guess? It's a very fair question. Where was it going to go? I was trying to find my nerd emote, and my screen's looking weird, so no nerd emote for me right now, weirdly. All right. So indirect statement. This is when you report what somebody else said, because you are stating something indirectly. You're using somebody else's words. So what they said is indirectly stated. So direct statements are those that you make yourself, or the speaker, writer makes themselves, and are quoted in the exact language. Indirect statements are those reported in a different form of words. So for example, direct statements, the Gauls are brave, and various different tense changes. Indirect statement would be, he says that the Gauls are brave. He said that the Gauls were brave. Whatever relative tense and all that kind of stuff that you have to do. So in English, you have your verb of the head. So he says, he thinks, he hears, he believes that. Oh, Max, also thank you. I don't know why I'm not hearing my alerts. I mean, it's my computer, I know. So thank you, thank you. I was told that the Gauls were brave, another indirect statement. Pretty good. Oh, I see your emphasis now. I was told that they were brave. Blah, blah, blah. Snap. So, yeah, English, verb of the head, the word that, and then the sentence. When the verb of the head is a present tense, the indirect statement uses the same tense as the direct statement. When the verb of the head is in the past, you do a little tense shift just to make it sound right. A lot of times in English, we'll actually leave out the that. He said the Gauls were brave. That is perfectly acceptable in English. He said the Gauls were brave. But technically speaking, this is how you form it in English. So, of course, I will be looking as I need to do that run. Oh yeah, enjoy your run. I hope it is cool enough outside. So, nothing too crazy there. Indirect statements in Latin, we may have mentioned before, but maybe not, because we're going through it all now. So, indirect statement had the verb in the head. He said, he heard, he believed, he thought. whatever, like that. Then, for the indirect part, the subject of the indirect part will be the accusative, and the verb of the indirect part will be in the infinitive. Conceptually, what this shows is that the Romans thought the indirect statement is the object of the verb of the head. He said, what did he say? Accusative infinitive, because it's the object of speaking. It makes a lot of sense that way. So, for example, Dixit Gallos esse fortis. He said that the Gauls were brave. Not too bad. But remember, especially if you're composing English to Latin, there's no conjunction corresponding to that. Do not use ile in your indirect statement. That will make no sense. The verb is in the infinitive, subject in the accusative. The tenses of the infinitive are not changed after past tense of the principal verb. So, esse fuisse futuros esse, right? You just use the same tense of the infinitive that the direct clause would be in. Exactly, Ross. He punched X. He said X. It's obviously the object. It's obviously in the accusative. So the rule for the indirect statement, when a direct statement becomes indirect, the principal verb of the indirect clause is changed to the infinitive, and its subject nominative becomes a subject accusative of the infinitive. So just the reminder about the tenses of the infinitive. Sunt. Well, that's not actually helpful. There is the present infinitive, esse, audire, whatever the second principal part is. There's a perfect infinitive where you take the third principal part and add isse, so fuisse, whatever. And then there's a future infinitive, which is the future active participle, whose ending will match the accusative subject, and then esse. So a present indicative of a direct statement becomes present infinitive of an indirect. If a direct statement was using a past verb, you'll use the perfect infinitive. And if the direct statement that you're making indirect use the future, you'll use the future infinitive. You don't have to do anything more complicated than that. Of course, usually it is the present or the perfect. The future isn't too often. All right, and what I keep saying verb of the head is our main verb in an indirect or setting up an indirect statement. So what's the rule for this? Verbs followed by indirect statement. The accusative with infinitive construction in indirect statements is found after verbs of saying, telling, knowing, thinking, and perceiving. So some common ones include dico, to say, nego, to deny, nuntio, to announce, respondeo, to reply, cognosco, to know, scio, to know, arbitror, to think, estimo, to believe, judico, to judge, puto, to think, spero, to hope, audio, to hear, sentio, to feel, video, to see, or intellego, to understand. Okay, that's nothing too tricky. So a couple, let's look at number 7. This is a nice example here. Legati responderant neminem ante Caesarem illam insulam adisse. The legates responded, verb of the head. We have an accusative. So in English we say that nobody. Then we have to go to our infinitive, adisse, that nobody had approached that island, illam insulam, before Caesar. Right. So the only tricky part is you do end up with a lot of accusatives. But generally speaking, it will be accusative nominative, or the accusative subject, the accusative object, and then the infinitive. All right. So we also had the irregular verb pharaoh. Again, in the perfect, it's a regular verb, kind of. I say kind of because we'll look at the principal parts. They only have the compound verbs there, but the principal parts of pharaoh are pharaoh, fere, tuli, latum. Tuli and latum, you can probably guess, aren't super linguistically related to pharaoh. They are not the same root, but they get used for the same meaning as pharaoh in the perfect. So they're regular in terms of the endings that you put on them, but they're kind of irregular in that they don't really belong with pharaoh. What did you do there, Latin? But you can see from the infinitive fere, there's a slight problem. There's an E missing. We would expect pharaoh, ferere. We know that Pharaoh's root is the local deity, so he can do whatever he likes. Very funny. And in fact, that infinitive missing E is your hint for the ways that Pharaoh is irregular. Pharaoh is a pretty regular third conjugation verb, except it misses an E in a few forms, or misses the vowel in a few forms. So pharaoh is normal, but the second person singular is fers, F-E-R-S, instead of feres. The third singular, fert, instead of ferret, F-E-R-E-T. Then we get the regular feremus, regular feretis, and regular ferunt, F-E-R-U-N-T. It is regular than the imperfect, ferie bomb, so forth. Or ferie bomb, sorry. No I in that. And then regular in the future, feram, feras, ferat. That was the subjunctive. Feram, feris, ferit, with an I. So it's really just a couple forms in the present that are irregular. It means to bear, to carry, so it's a super, super important verb, which is why it becomes irregular. The more you say something, the less regular it becomes, unfortunately. That is why so many idioms are incorrect these days. Because as people say them, they get corrupted. Right. Our third point for the day, the dative with compounds. So the dative is the case of the indirect object. We know that. I give a gift to something or other, to or for. So many intransitive verbs take an indirect object and can be used with the dative. Transitive verbs take a direct object in the accusative, but sometimes they have an indirect object in the dative, right? This all makes sense. So the whole question, I'm just going to read what he says because I'm not sure where he's going with this. The whole question then as to whether or not a verb takes a dative depends upon its capacity for governing an indirect object. A number of verbs in their simple form do not have an indirect object, but in compound, they need an indirect object. Oh, okay. It's just explaining why. So the basic rule is that verbs that are compound, so they have the base and then the prefix, those verbs, instead of taking an accusative direct object, sound like they're taking a dative direct object. And it's because of this complicated reasoning that he just explained. So let's look at these examples. Haecures exeter citui magnum calamitatem atulit. So this thing brought forward great destruction to the army. Okay. Well, that's an accusative and then a direct object. That makes sense. That's not weird. The Germans brought war to the Gauls. Okay. These troops did not take part in the battle. Okay. Another way that you could say number 3, these troops did not enter into the battle. So it sounds like it might be the accusative, but it's compound verb. So it takes a dative as an object. The horsemen meet the fleeing enemy. This is an even better example. So horsemen meet the fleeing enemy. Sounds like fleeing enemy should be accusative because it's who they meet. But occurrent is from the prefix ob and the verb curro, to run towards. And because of that compound nature, it's taking an indirect object or a dative direct object because there's some sort of implied direct object in the head of the Romans. / the verb curro, to run, could not take a direct object. You can't run. You can run a mile, but that's not the actual direct object. You run on the road, right? There's no direct action that these intransitive verbs do. So because of that, the Romans are like, well, this wouldn't take an accusative object, so it's taking the dative. Because you're running to meet with the fleeing enemy. And then Galba copiis filium praefectit. Galba made his son in charge of the troops. That sounds like a weird way to phrase it, Latin to English. But again, in the Roman head, okay, Galba fecit filium. He made his son. But then we're praefacio, so we're in a compound verb. So putting someone in charge of something, so that second object should be in the dative because we're doing a compound verb, and compound verbs should take datives. Like it or not, that's the reality. In each sentence, there's a dative and each verb combined with a preposition. In no case would the simple verb take the dative. So the rule: some verbs, when compounded with ad, ante, con, de, in, inter, ob, post, pri, pro, sub, or super, use the dative of indirect object, but frequently it sounds like a direct object. The transitive compounds may take both an accusative and a dative. To bring something to report to, that makes sense. Intersum, to take part in, you would think it would be an ablative, but no, it's a compound verb, so we're using a dative anyway. It's a little fuzzy why the Romans decided to do that, but they did. Let's look at number 6. Caesar sociis imperavit ne finitimis, sorry, we're using the dative, suis bellum inferet. So, Caesar ordered his allies. All right, so impero is taking the jussive noun clause, an indirect command. So he ordered them not, nay, to bring inferet, war, on their own neighbors. Finitimis suis. So infero is a compound noun because it is, what is the phrase that they used? Transitive. Is also taking an accusative direct object with that dative object. So Caesar ordered his allies not to bring war on their neighbors. All right. Indirect questions, dative of purpose. Genitive, ablative, description. I'm going to end early because I think next week we'll just finish everything. Because we've got one big construction left, indirect questions, 2 syntax things, an ablative and a genitive, and then just review. So we'll do those items next week. So sorry for the short stream, but thanks for being here, and I hope everybody has a lovely